Hello, this Zoom video is being prepared and I will put this on YouTube because I wanted to share with you Pearson's videos on the play Trifles. So I'm going to share my screen and then play the videos so that you can get your one of the tasks on week 13 discussions forum done. I was trying to do this earlier, but it did not work, so here it is.
In the original production of Trifles by the Provincetown Players, the theater troupe for which Susan Glaspell wrote her play, the author played the role of Mrs. Hale, and her husband played Mr. Hale, the nearest neighbors of Minnie Foster Wright and her dead husband, John Wright. In the following scene, Mrs. Peters and Mrs. Hale, waiting in the kitchen while the men search the farm for evidence of Minnie Wright's guilt in her husband's death, discover a quilt that Minnie Wright had been piecing or preparing to assemble. After listening to the scene, you may want to read it again, noting the detailed stage directions that accompany the dialogue. She was piecing a quilt. It's a log cabin pattern. Pretty, isn't it? I wonder if she was going to quilt it or just knot it. They wonder if she was going to quilt it or just knot it. Frank's fire didn't do much up there, did it? Well, let's go out to the barn and get that cleared up. I don't know if there's anything so strange, our taking up our time with little things while we're waiting for them to get the evidence. I don't see as there's anything to laugh about. Of course, they've got awful important things on their minds. Mrs. Peters, look at this one. Here, this is the one she was working on, and look at the sewing. All the rest of it has been so nice and even. And look at this. It's all over the place. Why, it looks as if she didn't know what she was about. What are you doing, Mrs. Hale? Just pulling out a stitch or two that's not sewed very good. Bad sewing always made me fidgety. I don't think we ought to touch things. I'll just finish up this end. Mrs. Peters? Yes, Mrs. Hale. What do you suppose she was so nervous about? Oh, I don't know. I don't know if she was nervous. I sometimes sew awful queer when I'm just tired. As its title suggests, Trifles is about the details of Minnie Wright's life, and how those details are quietly discovered by Mrs. Peters and Mrs. Hale as they wait in the kitchen for the men to conclude their investigation. Like all of the central props of the play, the soiled roller towel, the jars of preserved fruit burst by the cold, the broken bird cage and the body of the canary it had recently housed, the quilt has one meaning for the women and a different one for the men. For example, the women noticed the log cabin pattern Minnie was piecing, a pattern composed of a central red square symbolizing the hearth, surrounded by radiating blocks of cloth to form a comforting reminder of the warmth of the home. They also know that she could either have knotted down the corners of each block or quilted the entire piece, stitching it painstakingly and evenly to the backing cloth in a labor-intensive process usually undertaken in groups. In addition to details about a typical life of sewing, preserving, washing, cleaning, and cooking, the blocks of fabric also inform this pair of detectives of a motive for murder strong enough to lead them eventually to conclude that they possess conclusive evidence of Minnie's guilt. It is not clear whether this truth would necessarily hold up in court, however. Their evidence is circumstantial and conjectural, based solely on what was traditionally known as women's intuition. When at the conclusion of the play, the county attorney facetiously remarks to the sheriff that, at least we found out she was not going to quilt it, and Mrs. Hale explains in response, we call it knot it, Mr. Henderson. Our awareness of the double meaning of the word knot, the quilt, and the noose, underlines for us the different types of knowledge and different types of truth about which the different meaning of a single word can inform us. The tightly knit web of images that slowly reveals Minnie's life to us serves several purposes simultaneously. The two women's intuition into Minnie's motives not only leads them to assume her guilt in the murder of her husband, but it also compels them to disguise that knowledge, even if it means for Mrs. Peters that she must break the law and betray the trust of her husband, the county sheriff. Because the two women never spell out the conclusions they reach, Glaspell requires the members of her audience also to analyze and interpret the meaning of the images and to reach their own conclusions about them. The way we read the details around us, the trifles of everyday life, she suggests, can have profound implications for the actions we take. We learn from Glaspell's play that trifles provoke dramatic action as well as reveal hidden truths. They lead one woman to cold-blooded murder, just as they had previously led Mr. Wright to wring a bird's neck for nothing worse than singing. They lead two other women to deduce a chain of events from the most apparently insignificant clues, and further lead those women to the decision to become accessories after the fact, concealing what they regard as damning evidence of guilt. The great skill of Glaspell's writing is to show us how the words we use when we speak, trifles themselves after all, take on a weight far beyond anything we could have expected from them. One of the best ways to write about her play is to examine some of the many ways in which she does this. Susan Glaspell was born in rural Iowa in 1882. After graduating from Drake University in Des Moines in 1899, she worked as a newspaper reporter for the Des Moines Daily News, where she wrote a series of 27 articles on the indictment and trial of Margaret Hossick for the murder of her husband, John. According to the scholar who rediscovered these articles, Glaspell's attitude, at first quite hostile towards the accused, became sympathetic after she visited and studied the Hossick farm. To write about Glaspell's transformation of this material, you could research her coverage of the Hossick case. What kind of changes did Glaspell make to the facts? What do you think may have motivated them, and how do they affect our understanding of the play as we have it? Why, for example, did Glaspell choose to avoid any mention of the trial, or even to speculate on what might happen to Minnie Wright? A farmer's wife in the Great Plains had to perform a daily set of chores that stretched from before dawn until long after dark under extreme conditions. The oppressive summer heat, for example, during which Minnie would have sweated over the stove putting up fruit, and the bitter winter cold that cracks the jars because the kitchen fire has gone out. What are some of the specific realities of prairie life that are revealed in Trifles? How does Glaspell use those details to further the argument of her play? You might also choose to research the history of life on the prairie and compare the results of that research with Glaspell's portrayal of the same life in Trifles. Glaspell and the Provincetown Players, the theater troupe she founded with her husband, are widely credited with establishing the one-act play as an artistic and commercial genre in the American theater. What are some of the ways in which Glaspell uses the compact one-act structure to develop her material in Trifles? If you were going to expand this play to traditional 3- or 5-act length, what characters and scenes would you add? What would you change? What effect would these changes have on our experience of the play? What might have motivated Glaspell's choice of the one-act form? Trifles was written during a time of enormous political ferment, including the first fully fledged feminist movement centered around women's suffrage or the right to vote. In what way did the ideas expressed within Trifles challenge the prevailing order of gender relations? To what degree is Trifles descriptive of broader social problems? To what degree is Trifles prescriptive about what should be done to address those problems?
Okay, so as you can see, 3 videos, especially the last one, gives you a bunch of writing prompts or further directions to enhance or to dig deeper and enhance your understanding of this play. If you like this play, you can go ahead and follow some of the suggestions made presented in the 3rd video. Other than that, the first 2 on reading and interpreting should give you a bit more to think about as you are digesting this play. So we're not writing a major paper on the play. However, understanding it and appreciating this play will enable you to grasp the significance of our drama unit. After our drama unit, we will also begin working on the metamorphosis, which is novella. Okay? More on that to come. See ya.